Hi there, Miss Lewis.
Ms. Lewis? Ms. Lewis? Ms. Lewis? You will have, we formally voted to adjourn closed session, so there will need to be a roll call for the work session.
How do I get on?
Take off mute, Mr. Sonoma.
Dr. Roberts, you are connected, but your video feed is not on, but you do appear to be connected to the meeting.
Okay, I don't know what to do.
If you put your cursor over your screen, there will be a blue box with 3 dots in the upper right corner. If you click on that box, there should be one of your options should be start the video.
Okay.
You are now visible, Dr. Roberts.
Are we still waiting on, looks like Susan and Donna?
Hello?
Hello. Hi, Donna.
Hi, I've been here.
Oh, have you? Okay, I couldn't see you.
I see Zoom up here.
Do we have everybody? Okay. We are already in session, so we will start moving through the agenda. The first item on the agenda is the May consent agenda. Are there any questions or feedback regarding that for Dr. Adams?
I don't understand.
You don't,
Dorothy, I'm gonna
Yeah.
leave the meeting because I can't, all I see is, I just see you in the corner.
okay. Ms. Van Noy, it looks like we're sharing your screen. Is there a way you can take that off for now?
Yes.
Donna, is
Oh,
it better?
I'm
Yeah.
fine.
Okay.
Yeah, that's all right.
Susan, can I just check, does your audio work?
Can you hear me?
Yes. Perfect. Okay. All right, so back to the agenda. So the first item on the agenda is the May consent agenda. Are there questions or feedback for Dr. Adams regarding that? The board did receive responses to the requests that were submitted in advance. So are there any items the board would like to discuss or further inquire about? So one question that I will pose then to the board is, we are coming up on one full year of governance. We've now worked through quite a few of these board books and consent agendas. So are there suggestions or do you have feedback regarding the process we've been following to obtain information and receive information back from the leadership? Okay, the other question I have then for the board is.
Sorry, I was waiting for
Okay.
others to speak, but
Sure, go ahead.
I know I worked with Dr. Adams earlier this year on a form that made sure that we were collecting adequate data to make a decision about whether a program or service was beneficial to students. And I think I mentioned this in my questions that I submitted, but I don't feel that we are when we get consent agenda items, I don't feel that we're getting the data that we need to make that assessment, which is making I'm uncomfortable voting on things when I don't know if they're beneficial for students. Even things that are free are taking away from student instructional time. And so I just would like to see all of our consent agenda items have, with the expected outcomes, what the measurable evidence will be, and then how that is, how that's being measured, and then what those measurements are. And the historical data piece, I don't think I've ever seen filled out. And so I'd also like to know if over time, these programs are actually making progress.
And just Dr. Adams, if you'll give me just 1 second, if everyone could mute who is not currently speaking, that would be really helpful. Okay, Dr. Adams.
And Mrs. Miller, I indicated in my response to your questions this time that I do think it's important for us to have a meeting relative to what your requests are. I do think this is a process that's new for staff, not necessarily new for staff to provide evidence, but evidence in a way that you are kind of understanding or wanting the evidence. So I have no problem sitting down with you to try to understand that. I want to say that, number one. Number two, I do think there is a learning process for the new document, because I think staff has been regurgitating what they have put in the background, but not necessarily the data from the previous year. So and I'll just use an example. On Monday of this week, and I said this to the president as well, I worked with the staff member who's responsible for pulling this all together to walk through every single one of the items for the next meeting, such that the data that's collected can be in line with what we say the goal or the outcome should be with data. In terms of historical information, it's not likely you're going to find 3 or 4 or 5 years of historical information, but more likely that you have information from the year that we are voting on. So I would ask that you give us the next meeting to look at the data in a manner in which you're looking at it for. And I'll give you some examples of what that looks like prior to the June meeting, so you could actually see the performance of the vendor performance report or the MOU performance report with what the goal is and data, measurable data that shows exactly what was measured. And so I think that's what you're asking for. That's what we've not been necessarily providing 100%. I think attempts have been made by staff to do so. But again, this is they are doing this different than what they've done before. And so it is a learning curve to get there. But at the last meeting, and I said this to the president, because she and I had a one-on-one conversation regarding this, that for the June meeting, for the meeting coming up, the next book that y'all will get, when you look at the performance, the vendor performance report, you see exactly what you're looking for in a way that is aligned from the goal to the measurable data result. If not, it won't come before the board.
Yeah, and I understand that this hasn't been the way that things have been conducted in the past, so I understand the historical data. But I look forward to the alignment between the expected outcomes and the data that's collected that tells us whether those outcomes were met. So thank you.
You're welcome.
Donna, you need to unmute.
Yes, I had some concerns along the same lines as you did, Tracy. As far as the data collection, over the years, I've noticed, and I do collect the data. I keep the books that I've even had since 2006. And I noticed that there was not an evaluation along the same lines that you're speaking of, Tracy. That I'm just hoping that the district will put together a library downtown at 801 or wherever the headquarters is. So when we have a vendor, just say for instance, like the bus company that we use, over the years, there's tons of information about them. If it could be collected and categorized under their name, their performance, complaints, compliments, or what have you. So me as a board member, if I wanted to look them up and say, hey, okay, back in 2014, this happened, that happened, and I know what to expect from that vendor, whether or not I might want to vote yes or no for that vendor once again. But we have so much information that we're putting together. I'm not understanding why we don't have a library down at 801, because the district has paid for so much, so many services, so much professional development, that teachers, when they come in, we pay for it over and over again. If they could come to a central location like 801 and just go into this library and start refreshing themselves on whatever it is that we've done in the past. But I would certainly like what Tracy said, to see the district develop a library of all the valuable information that we have paid for over the years. And that would make me feel more comfortable as well, because I was concerned, like you are, Tracy, about the lack of past performance of vendors. Because when I first came back, when I came on in 2006, people were complaining about the vendors that we were using, that they were not doing a great job. And they were coming back like 2 and 3 times. This might have been their 3rd time with a contract, and they hadn't even finished, did a good job the first time. So yes, that's a great idea. Thank you.
Is there other feedback here regarding the process surrounding the consent agenda requests and as we move into the next year of governance? So my next question then to the board would be that on average, we do not have 100% participation in the consent agenda request and request for information. So what are board members, what do you need as a board member to be able to participate fully in that process? How can we better meet your needs as board members to make sure you have the information that you need? But also looking forward into the next school year, how can we proactively be asking the right questions? And so I'd like to hear some feedback from the board on this as well.
So for me, I guess two things. One, and this is around the previous thing, things that I think can improve. I think having certain categories, so I don't know how the agenda items are organized, but having certain categories would help me. So for example, I know in our last executive session, there were a couple of items that were expenditure increases. So I don't know if we can separate consent. And I know for the most part they are, but set up new categories for consent agenda items. So these are like ed resources, or these are contract extensions, or these are changes in contract amounts or additions or anything like that. Because it's kind of, you turn the page and you get a surprise of what it is. So I think that having categories would help. This to address the more immediate question, President Rhodey Collins. I think for me, and I've talked to Dr. Adams about this too, just to make sure that he was aware. There are certain questions that we get to ask that the public does not get to ask. So for me, it's more of a reservation to make sure that we can ask those questions in the public sphere, and those answers can be provided in real time. And I've let Dr. Adams know that just to make sure we were on the same page. But if there was a way for us to, and maybe it's already there and I just don't know it, to provide the questions that we ask, make those public, that would help me.
Okay, so that was something Dr. Adams and I can discuss, a way to make those available. But just to be clear, any question that's submitted ahead of time can also be reiterated or asked in open session. So there's nothing that precludes a board member who submits a question in advance from also asking that question in open session. The benefit would be that there is time to have a response. So I know sometimes during open session, if we're asking a question, that the response is we will gather that data and come back to you with it, which then we get via email or a presentation in a later month. So the submitting of questions ahead of time allows for that real-time response if it is a question that you also want to ask in open session.
And unless I'm wrong, like what I was just talking about with the data, we can also describe the question and the reason that we might not be voting for something during open session. Is that not correct?
That is absolutely correct. So if you have reservations about an item and you're asking for it to be taken separately, and you in that period between when the motion is made and when the vote happens, if there are any reservations that you have about voting for it, you can certainly bring those before the board for their consideration at that time, because there may be things that we haven't thought of.
Dorothy, I have a
Yes,
question.
Dr. Roberts.
I'd like to understand the necessity for walk-on items that we get the same day of the meeting, and so really don't have enough time to digest it. And they happen to be items that that have been in place, ahead of time. And so I just wonder, why do we continue to get the walk-on items the day of the meeting?
So normally, Dr. Roberts, the walkout items are really the ones that I try to walk on, or not real estate, or items having to do with facilities. If there's some emergency that has to be done. The rest of the items is an error in somebody not getting something to me timely. That's the honest answer. I may find out about a contract that was about to start the next couple of days, and I don't want to make it a ratification, which means you're voting after the fact. So I try to get it to you before the fact such that if you have any concerns about it, it could be stopped there as opposed to after the fact. Then you have no power to stop it because it's a ratification after the fact. So I try to minimize those, but Mr. Casey is the only one that really has permission to bring items and for me to walk on because they have to do with some issue to do with facilities.
Okay, thank you. And so your effort is to minimize those with the exception of Mr. Casey.
My desire is to eliminate them with the exception of this. That is correct.
Okay. Thank you.
There are other feedback regarding this process or ways that would help increase participation in the information request process. Okay, so with that, we'll move on to the next item on our agenda, which is the calendar. Dr. Adams, and I believe Ms. Vanoy has the presentation here.
Yes, you have a copy of it, and I will obviously for the public go over the calendar, and I will be asking you to take a vote on the calendar, but that after we get started. Ms. Vanoy, do you mind putting it up, please? Everybody has a copy, so I'll go through it. The public won't get a chance to see. I thought she was putting it up. No, okay. So if you look at page 1, this is to provide you with some feedback from the 2020-2021 calendar feedback. As you know, the window was open from our last meeting until last Friday. There was 1,689 total comments. Some of the comments had multiple parts, so they may be counted more than once. There were 5 comments submitted through Let's Talk. There was 1 comment submitted by email. You have a copy of the Let's Talk comments attached to this document or right behind this document and the email as well. I will walk through the big themes that came from the 1,689 comments. It should be noted that last year we had 261 comments. So a dramatic number increase from the previous year. So as it relates to the early start, which was August the 4th, you can see some of the big themes, health and safety with some of the comments that the parties indicated, student well-being, academics, and staff impact. There was really one page that aligned itself to about 400 comments that was saying it makes sense to look at starting school on August the 4th. And the reasons would be kids losing ground, staff impacted, getting to go back in their classrooms, student well-being, the health and wellness of kids getting in school, and health and safety of getting kids in school in terms of the daylight saving time and other kinds of issues that you can read and see it yourself. There were several pages on comments against early start. One, obviously, the number one was the fact that the district was breaking the law, since the state law is that I want to say 2 weeks before Labor Day, school should not start. And a large number of comments, I think the numbers were around 300 to 400, that say you were breaking the law. Why were you doing it? What were the reasons why? Safety, and I think Mrs. Jones framed this a little bit in our closed session when she was talking about the notion of kids going back to school and parents keeping kids away from school because it would be early on. And so the whole issue around safety. The financial impact on families was the second one. We would not necessarily align with the tax-free weekend. Thank you, Ms. Vanoy. We are on page 3 now, or page 4. Inconsistent with other districts was really the law, and the fact that, as I had conversations with the board before about charters being allowed to do this in the district or not. One comment, it was really just 1 or 2 comments about what happens with summer school, partners comments. Some other comments against the early start, meaning that the facilities be up and running in terms of cleaning and all of those kinds of things, deep cleaning. The other comment was around the financial impact on staff that would be having to have childcare for their children, summer jobs that teachers would not be able to have, compensation for teachers, and that it was unfair, penalty for teachers as well, unfair and despicable that the superintendent is willing to violate the state law. And then obviously there's a penalty if we violate the state law and losing dollars. It's also bad timing in the sense that college visits, college drop-offs, one comment relative to religious holiday, late enrollment, pre-K starting with SLPS, just comments about the timing of it not being aligned with what parents, the staff, families, and parents felt. The last two comments were comments around, at least against academic attendance, summer slide, virtual learning, map testing, make up them not being aware that we didn't have to do any map testing. AP testing, not enough days because it was a reduction in the number of days from 178 that we had the previous year. Staff being confused and upset because it was so late that this recommendation was being made and they would have to make some adjustments in their schedules. The other comments that came were not necessarily for or against, but just concerns or recommendations. Student illness policy, what are we doing around a policy relative to student illnesses, meaning students coming to school who might be infected by the virus, and what are we doing? Calendar notes about are we losing New Year's Day, Election Day, comments around parent-teachers conferences. 3 years ago, teachers would do parent-teachers conferences and they would be off that Friday. That was changed a year ago or 2 years ago. Spring break, liking the fact that it was aligned to other districts. Winter break, like the length of it. Opinion about charters and open houses as well in terms of how this would impact open houses. So those were the comments that came. And as a result of those comments, this is what I would be recommending to the board. Number one, our summer school was in June, but because of the COVID-19 virus, we will be looking to have a virtual high school program starting on July 6th, ending on July 31st. This virtual high school program would allow us to get kids credit recovery for those students who need it. It would also give us an opportunity for those students who didn't have an opportunity for CPR, the CPR classes, the government classes, for them to take those classes that are required. We will look at changing the August date from the 3rd or the 11th. That should say not the 14th, but the 11th. I'm sorry, develop a summer school program for middle school students from August the 3rd to August the 14th. This would be a brick and mortar summer school or a combination of brick and mortar, meaning kids coming to school and possibly some virtual opportunities as well. This would be for middle and high school students to get them back into school, transitioning ESYP, which is our special education program, as well as those kids who are transitioning. One of the comments that came from the board at the last meeting, what are we doing around transitioning? This will give us the ability for 8th grade students to transition to high school 2 weeks earlier such that they can get acclimated. And also for those elementary kids in 6th and 7th grade transitioning to 8th grade, transition to middle school. We would change the PD day from September the 11th to September the 18th. The last day of school would not be the 19th or the 21st, which was the recommendation in the first calendar, but the recommendation would be that the last day of school would be June the 4th. Again, reinstating again, last day of school, June 4th, and summer school would move from the 9th, would move to June 9th to July the 7th. So there will really be 2 opportunities for summer school beginning in June, beginning in July and August, to end this year, since we're not having a summer school this year, and put summer school again on the back end of the 2020-21 school year. So, and the state allows you the ability to do this. We're not the only district looking to model this kind of calendar this year. All of this is contingent upon any information we get from the health department. So this is a recommendation. Any number of things can change based on information I get from the health department, but this would be our best attempt to try to get high school kids an opportunity to do credit recovery and an opportunity for our middle and elementary students, those who are not reading on level. Senate bill, I can't think what the Senate bill is right now, but the Senate bill that requires 3rd and 4th grade students to take remediation in reading Normally it would be a 20-day period of time. This will be a 10-day period of time to get kids back into the flow of coming back to school. So this is what the recommendation would be. The next slide kind of frames the me crossing out the dates, option 1 and option 2, and looking at option 3. The next slide frames again the same thing, looking at the start date being the 24th. First, winter break would stay the same period of time. Class will resume back again on the 4th. That is an error for option 3. That should be 1-4. Please make a correction if you don't mind, board. That should be a 1-4. 3-22 and 3-26 will be spring break, and obviously, I'm sorry, yeah, that should be 1-4, and 6-24 would be the time that the school year would end. What I would be asking is the board to make the approval. Obviously, our calendar normally is approved sometimes in February, but because of the fact that we appealed the recommendation of starting 10 days before, our calendar is late, and I would like to try to get approval as soon as possible, such that we could publicize this and get it before the public. Questions that the board might have relative to the calendar. I know I gave you a lot of information, and that was Senate Bill 319, where it requires kids that are not reading on grade level, especially in the city of St. Louis, that those students would go to summer school. A lot of information. I know you've received feedback and comments, as I did as well, relative to the calendar, and this would take into those in consideration of feedback and comments we did get from the public and make the adjustments that you see before you.
I just had one comment to add from a parent who contacted me yesterday in 63106, which is one of the lowest income zip codes. So their comment was that having to change the school date, they had vacations planned or family visits, and sometimes in the equity piece, we make assumptions about people who don't have means, and they are hoping that some of these things can be rescheduled. And by starting the school year earlier, they would miss out on valuable family time, valuable vacations, and things that would really essentially be very good for their social and emotional wellness. So I didn't see that on our comments, but I did tell that parent that I would bring it to everyone's attention in the public meeting.
Yes, ma'am, and that's why we are aligning now with the 8/24 timeline to align with the kind of comments that you received, and I did as well.
Thank you.
I have a question.
Dr. Adams?
Go ahead.
Dr. Roberts, go ahead.
I'm sorry, was someone speaking?
No, Dr. Roberts, go ahead.
Donna made a good point around some challenges that our parents will be facing, and is this the time to give some consideration to that before we move forward in approving the calendar?
Yes, ma'am. So I think the comments that were referenced will be around what we would do as we come back. The 8-3 time would accommodate those kids who need to be in summer school, and obviously this is all optional. We would not require anybody to be in school on 8-3. If we could even start on 8-3, it would be the idea to give those kids, while we have a set of families who are indicating they don't want to start school until 8/24, we have a set of families who are indicating they want to start school and get back in the flow of what needs to happen in school as soon as possible. It would also give us an opportunity to put any kind of social distancing policies or practices in place with a small number of kids. The summer school that I'm envisioning right now as it relates to elementary will be at their school site with teachers from their school, and it would be an 8-2 time frame, and there would be a minimum of 60 kids. I think I provided you with a copy of a document that is at the back of the presentation that walks you through that walks you through the plan for summer school. Here it is right here.
It looks like this.
I've read all of the documents. I have all of the
Okay.
documents, and I've read them all. my question is specifically to parents who still feel uneasy about returning. And will they be given an option of virtual learning or something that we can still capture the attendance, even if they're not in the brick and mortar building? I
Yes, ma'am.
believe that's the essence of Donna's question. Is
Yes,
that
ma'am.
correct, Donna?
You're on mute,
I
Ms.
can't
Jones.
hear you.
I'm sorry. Yes, I was just really concerned that we are going to lose thousands of students if we don't have another option to capture the students whose parents don't feel comfortable having their babies in school just yet, even in August or September, because even the colleges are saying they're not going to come back into session until January. So people want certain. And if we have some other option that they're going to, you're going to allow credit, with online learning, that would be a great option for our students that want to wait.
Yes, ma'am. During the summer, we're going to model, obviously we've struggled through, and I think a number of districts, we're not the only district, the virtual program that we had to quickly adjust to do. The idea is that the month of June, we're planning and working with teachers, providing them professional development. And then during the summer, starting in July, the date I said, July 6th, I think it is, students will be at the high school level in a virtual program where we have teachers and mentors supporting students in a small environment. Right now, teachers were supporting 120 students or 80 students or 90 students. It will be the intent for this summer school program that we will be putting together. That will be a smaller ratio, like 1 to 20, such that students are working with a teacher in a virtual kind of over the month of July. We will model that same program during the school year based upon students who are indicating that, to your point, Ms. Jones, that they don't want to come back to school. They want to stay in a virtual environment. It will be our intent to try to give kids both options. If you want to come back to brick and mortar, come back to a building, we'll give you that option. But if you want to be online, we will continue to give you the virtual option that we had in place during the summer. The program that we have right now is working, but it's working for 100% of our students because teachers are learning as they go along. Kids are learning as they go along. But the summer school program hopefully will give us an opportunity to get a leg up and better what we need to be doing for the beginning of the school year. But the beginning of the school year will be the same, whether you're on virtual or not on virtual, but it will be exactly the same in terms of the date. So what you're approving today, or hopefully approving today, is a calendar that says when school will start, whether it's them coming to a building or them being online.
I have one last question, please, in regards to that. I would like to see in your brick and mortar program, we have a shortage of nurses on staff, and people are going to want to go to work, and they're going to send their students to school. Some of them are going to come to school sick, and are we going to have someone at the door making sure that we're not allowing children that are not well back into the building, or staff that are not well back into the building? I mean, we have to be proactive right there at the door. Are we able to do that?
So I called Mr. Senoma today, and we had the same kind of conversation today around what's our policy around communicable diseases. And so part of what the task force that I am starting to meet with next week will be looking at policies that the board will have to adopt that will restrict students and staff from coming in the building. Are we asking staff to wear masks? Are we asking that everybody temperature be taken before they come into the building? Right now in this building, 801, no one can come in the building unless we take their temperature. No one can come in this building unless they have on a mask. It's going to be the board's responsibility, administration responsibility, to bring a policy before the board that the board will have to vote on, Ms. Jones, that may, to your point, be that restrictive, and us not to allow kids to come in school if they have a fever, if they're coughing. And so those are the kind of the kind of policies that we're going to look at. And part of my conversation with the health director tomorrow will be exactly that kind of question. What kind of restrictions are going to likely be put in place that can be enforced, because the enforcing agent in this is not the district, it will be the health department. The health department has to say, yeah, no one can come into a school building if they have a temperature of XYZ. We will follow that policy. So you are 100% in line with what we talked about today, that I talked about today with Mr. St. and likely what I will be talking to the health director about tomorrow at a 9 o'clock conference.
Dr. Adams, I have a question for you.
Yes, ma'am.
Has the district began to source masks and PPE equipment overall for the district if we, when we do, or if we do go back to this school year, whenever we do, have you guys begun to source for this equipment that we're gonna need for our staff and students?
Yes, ma'am. We got our first shipment of masks today. We're ordering masks, we're ordering gloves, and we're ordering infrared thermometers. We already have orders in for all of those items right now. With the, as you can imagine, they are more costly than they were before this happened. But yes, we got the first shipment in today, and we are expected. I don't want to say what the numbers are right now, but I can tell you offline what the numbers are. But we got our first shipment in of the PPE equipment today.
Okay, and did you look at the N95 mask, or are these just basic face masks?
We are ordering all of the equipments that would support the staff member and the staff member level of engagement with the public. And so the N95 masks are for a higher level of engagement. There are some restrictions around what students can wear. So we're not looking at the students piece right now, but we are looking at the teacher piece. And I did speak to the union president last night around what we will be looking at in terms of staff. So I want to be careful to say we are looking at all of these things. The health department will provide some guidance in terms of what we should be doing, we should not be doing. But to answer your questions, yes, we have started ordering PPE equipment, and yes, we have started receiving some.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Adams.
You're welcome.
I think all these questions about the return to school and the health concerns as they pertain to the opening of school are all really important. This current agenda item that we're on, though, is calendar. So what I will make the recommendation for, and please let me know if there are any objections, I will ask that we have a full presentation on this at the May work session, so we can get a full idea of what that school reopening would look like under a variety of circumstances. That allows this meeting with the city health department to go forward tomorrow, and I'm sure there'll be subsequent meetings as well. So if you have questions as it pertains to school reopening and the health and safety returns, please send them to me as you think of them, and we will compile those for a full presentation in May. Are there any objections to that? Okay.
Dorothy, I have a question before. I do have a question about one of the dates on the calendar.
Sure.
Yes, ma'am.
And it's specific to election day. I believe at one version, schools were going to be open for voting, but there would be no teachers or students. And now I see it's a PD day for staff. Has there been a change?
That was the same on the first calendar, the calendar that was offered the first time. We have traditionally not counted we have traditionally had students and staff in buildings on election day. This is a presidential election, so we are asking staff to come, but not students. So it is a PD day. And it is likely that the PD may be not a site-based PD, but district-wide PD. So staff may, a large portion of the staff may not even be in the building.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to ask Dorothy, could you give us a deadline for when you would like all of our questions submitted?
I will look at a calendar. I'll send that out in the board update like I do at following every meeting.
Thank you.
Yep. Tracy.
Yeah, I had a question about the calendar. And the I know the state law that the folks who are concerned about are referencing. Is there any discussion of or chance of that being like addressed in some way on account of the virus?
It is my understanding that this came up at the state board meeting on yesterday. It is also my understanding that there's some legislators that are pushing it. But we don't have the luxury of waiting until that happens. The meeting ends on May 15th. But yes, there has been some discussion at the state level, the DESI board meeting, as well as the legislative level, that for this year, it might make the waive the 10 days, because some schools want to go back early. They don't have maybe the level of intensity around the COVID-19 deaths or cases that the region is having, city and county. So I do think some districts, and it is being considered for what I understand.
Thank you.
So Dr. Adams, I'm really glad to hear that you're coordinating with the city health department and taking into account kind of from a broader perspective, what's going on with the pandemic and how it might affect our opening. One concern that I've been having in full honesty, Dr. Adams and I have talked about this, I thought that the August 4th school start date made a lot of sense, actually. And the reason for that is my concern is that as these stay-at-home orders are lifted, parents and families, the adults in the families are going to be going back to work. Where are the children going to go? We're already starting to see some data and reports coming out that childcare facilities may not be able to withstand this economic impact. So I think there is a real concern about who will be available to watch children and how can we protect a family's right to get back to work while also protecting a child's right to education. So I think there's a lot of factors here that are at play. I'm glad to hear that you're working with the city to be able to address some of those things. I do also think that this current calendar version 3 really starts to balance all of the factors that are at play here. So we know that we've got students currently engaged in the virtual learning, but that isn't quite the same as going into school every day and getting the supports, particularly for elementary school children who are learning to be away from their families. This transitional period of next fall, at whatever point in the fall it takes place, is going to be really critical. So this idea of making that summer school a transitional period to bring students back up academically, but also getting them back into the school building, really important and shows a good balance between all the tensions here. I have a couple questions. So every student who wants to attend summer school will be able to attend. It's not restricted to certain, if everybody could mute, I think that would be helpful. So it will be open then to every student who wants to attend?
Right now, we're targeting grades 3 through 8 for the elementary portion and any student in high school.
So for students that might be, so I'm thinking of like pre-K 3 or kindergarten students that are going into school for the first time, would they have the opportunity to participate, or at the younger grades just to help that transitional period?
We have not considered that. Obviously, if the board asks me to consider it, I'll come back and look at it. But we were looking at the SB law that requires those students who are not reading on level. But we normally do a jump start, if you will. I think Dr. Knight called it a jump start program at the pre-K and kindergarten level. It is something we did talk about. We did not necessarily disagree, but we looked at it from a different angle. And I was trying to get students who were going to be in the tested grades to be caught up as early as possible. But it is something we can look at. So I'll go back and have a conversation with her. It won't change the data or anything, but
Sure.
obviously it will impact what we do and how many kids we might look at. So we can go back and look at that.
And I think the other point of consideration here is, well, hold on, I'm all over the place. I'll come back to it. I lost my train of thought. Anyone else? There are no other questions on the calendar?
Donna, unmute.
Some people were having a problem with saying that we're breaking the law wanting to open at a certain date. But I thought of the irony of it was that why is the legislator or the elected body in Jefferson City allowing charter schools to open earlier than, and they don't have to abide by the same laws as St. Louis Public Schools. They get paid first before St. Louis Public Schools. So I'm just asking for a little fairness here you know, when it comes down to when we start talking about this calendar, the reason why you might have made the decisions that you have, you know, we have to consider that all monies that are going toward charter schools take away from St. Louis Public School students as well. So that's just something that I wanted to point out. I mean, when we talk about breaking the law, let's make sure that that we're going to be fair about it. If St. Louis Public Schools have to abide by a certain date, then so should charters. That's all I wanted to say.
Thank you very much for the comment. Thank you very much.
So the other thing I was going to mention was, do we know, or have you discussed what the deadline for enrollment would be? So this is obviously a rapidly changing situation, and parents' employment or other circumstances may be changing up until, you know, all the way through the summer and right up to that summer school start date. Would students be able to enroll up to the very last minute?
Oh, yes, no doubt about it. We've not done anything yet because obviously the board has to approve this, and we will start. We got feedback from network superintendents and principals over the last 2 days relative to the calendar as well as the summer school piece. And you can imagine we got a lot of feedback. And so after the vote tonight, hopefully if it's a yes vote, then we will start working with staff in terms of identifying those students. The reality is we have students who have not been engaged. They've picked up their technology, but they've not been engaged. So the intent is that we would try to get those students in summer school as well. While they have the technology, they're spending not as much time on as we would want them to spend on it. And so we were trying to get these kids back in school as early as possible because they're not engaged in doing the work that they need to be doing. So we would like to try to catch up some kids. So the bottom line is yes, we will be ready to move forward as soon as the board moves votes for this tonight.
Other questions regarding the calendar? Is there a motion?
Yeah, I move that we accept the proposed calendar for 2020-2021.
And when you say proposed, do you mean option 3?
Yes, the most recent option, which is 3.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any further discussion or questions?
I had one last question about the virtual attendance being offered. We do have a way of tracking that attendance and how much engagement there is with students and teachers. Is that correct?
For the credit recovery program we're talking about that will start in July, we will not have the same student-teacher ratio that we have right now. And it is our intent that we are checking in with students daily. Right now, that's a little bit hard. If you're a teacher with 120 students, you can't necessarily do that. You're checking in with students once or twice a week. So yes, the virtual environment doesn't require you to spend a specific amount of time. It's standards driven. So you finish the work. If you finish the work in a week's time or 2 weeks time, you get credit for that particular makeup. So it's a different kind of angle for the credit recovery when we talk about summer school that is likely going to be standards based as opposed to the number of hours. Summer school used to be, you have to have a certain number of seat hours, meaning you have to come every single day and not miss 2 or 3 days to get the credit plus do the work. Now it's going to be not necessarily the hours that you do, but the outcomes in terms of reaching some kind of standards.
I'm sorry, let me clarify. We spoke earlier about the possibility of virtual attendance for the first weeks of school for children who weren't able to come back to school.
Yes,
I guess I'm wondering if we're able to track our attendance and report that to DESE and what impact that would have on our weighted average daily attendance and funding.
So right now, the state policy is any kid who is involved in virtual, and don't quote me on this, I think my memory is correct, it counts as 90% attendance because of the 90-90 policy. If I'm on virtual, it's assumed that my attendance for that period of time is 90-90.
Thank you.
You're welcome. 92%, I just got a text that said 92%, counts as 92%.
Any further discussion before we vote? Ms. Lewis?
Ms. D. Jones,
I'm going to vote yes with the understanding that we will have options for our students who want to attend online.
Yes, ma'am.
Ms. S. Jones, Mr. Lang,
Yes.
Ms. Miller,
Yes.
Dr. Roberts, Mrs. Val,
Yes.
Mrs. Rhodey Collins.
We can
Yes.
hear you, Dr. Robert.
The motion has passed.
Ms. Lewis, I wasn't able to vote, and so I vote yes with the caveat that we do have options for students.
Okay, so moving on with the agenda, I will open this up to any type of discussion or feedback from the board regarding the Emerging Wisdom Report on the community visioning workshops and roundtables. So this was provided back to the board, I believe on April 14th or 13th, 14th, something like that. It has been made public as of the middle of last week and is available on the district website. So I would like to hear from the board if there are any takeaway feedback that you have and how this might guide our process moving forward.
I do have a comment. Since I attended all of except for one, and overwhelmingly, the comment that I heard most was that parents want to see consistency in leadership in the classroom. They really want to see the same teachers more often in their classrooms for their students. And that's something that I'm really praying that we can work on. I did mention before that I'm hoping that the people who come to our district that want to work as teachers will stay longer. And I mean, we spend millions of dollars on professional development, and then people get this training and then they leave the district. But what we need and what parents are asking for and the community is asking for is some type of dedication to our students because they deserve that. And that was one of the biggest things that I heard. That's it.
So for me, there were two really big takeaways here. The first was that there is a need for us to provide more transparent and clear communication from the district level, which we have been talking about recently as it pertains to the pandemic. But it is my hope that we can continue to do that just moving forward, and especially as we move into next school year. I think with the fact that there are so many changes coming, that I think a consistent response at the district level is helpful for parents, particularly those that have students in more than one school. I think probably bigger than that takeaway for the transparency piece was that this report solidified what we as a board already know and what we have already talked about, which is that this situation that we're facing, declining enrollment and the potential need to close school buildings, has really been the result of racism and redlining and segregation on behalf of the city, as well as like decades of disinvestment in North St. Louis and some South St. Louis neighborhoods. And so I'm wondering what opportunities are there for us as a board to proactively address the situation of vacant school buildings? What are the ways that we can look to ensure that we aren't going to have vacant buildings in neighborhoods? That was a huge concern coming up out of this report and from some of the other correspondence that we've received from the community as well. So I guess what I'm proposing is that this is a really big opportunity for us to look at this as a systems, take a systems perspective to figure out how can we encourage, or how can we use this moment to encourage growth and just kind of better future planning for our role as it pertains to the city and how we might move forward together.
Like Donna, I had the opportunity of attending all of the community visioning sessions, and there were quite a few takeaways. Leadership at every level was a prominent one. Of course, salaries was also very key in retaining teachers. They need competitive salaries. Parents also talked about collaboration and open communication between schools and being timely in that communication. And I'd like to say that at one time, the district had over 100,000 children. We're down to 22,000 perhaps. The system never left the community. Our community had options that they exercised, and those options, we all know what they are. And so we're left to try to provide, and we should be providing, a quality education to the students that remain in St. Louis Public Schools. So we've always been here in the community.
I know that this was, oh, go ahead, Donna.
Go ahead, Tracy.
No, please.
Well, I just wanted to say, I also heard a lot of the parents talk about the classes that were being offered to their children, and they wanted a better variety of classes. We have so many young people, young men and young women, including my own children and cousins and what have you, that have come through St. Louis Public School that are not trained, and they don't have a viable skill to offer the community at this time. And St. Louis Public School doesn't have that. They talk about home economics, those kinds of things. They talk about plumbing classes, construction. Here we have the NGA downtown, and we don't have a real viable, we have a few programs, but not enough to address what's happening here in the city, the new boom that's coming on, all the millions of dollars that are being spent. But the companies that are making this money have not thoroughly invested back into St. Louis Public Schools. And this is what needs to happen. This affects the crime level in our city right now. We see crime everywhere. We see our young people killing one another because the drug dealers are the big employers right now. And that's just the honest truth. I live in Walnut Park, and that's what I see every day. People were glorifying the ideal of seeing a fire truck occasionally in their neighborhood, but I hear the fire truck and the ambulances every few hours in my neighborhood because the young people here are selling drugs, because that's the only income that's happening here in the neighborhoods. There are no viable businesses around here because the city is not family friendly, and that's not fair. And our schools are not providing the environment that they could for our families that have dedicated themselves and stayed with this city and paid taxes. And it's about time that I heard in the audience, because people were really hot. They were really hot. They want something for their tax dollars. And I think it's just time that we give them what they need. And it's not that we don't want to, but we need the help of our people downtown. We need to stop Team 4. Right now, we're in the middle of gentrification, where we are losing, we're having African-American families or people of color being pushed out of the city of St. Louis and to other areas of the country right now. And that's what is affecting St. Louis Public School. That's not right. Let's get this right. So I get a little emotional about it because I've stayed in this neighborhood since I was 17. I've been here off and on, and Northwest School is right down the street. And there it is, almost vacant, because of the city of St. Louis has intentionally did what they have done all across the city, especially in brown communities. So let's put a stop to this. Let's give our students, let's give our families, let's give our staff what they deserve, because we have some very intelligent young people. We have some great staff members that are dedicated, and we have an opportunity, like Dorothy said, to make a difference in this community. Right now with the COVID-19, we get a chance to see the reason why the African-American community is dying at a faster rate, because there are no services. And it's the same thing that's happening with our schools. we're not getting our fair share over here. So let's do better.
I'm glad, actually, I'm really glad that Donna went right before me because I'd like to sort of build on that. I think Dorothy's question was like, so what can we do, right? That what can we do to be proactive about this? And I know we held these visioning workshops and we have collected the data, and now because we're in sort of an anomalous time, it feels sort of like we have stopped considering what might be best for students in this particular area. And so I would like to see us continue this conversation about school buildings, and in the same way that we planned to before the virus, with the input of the community, and understanding that, like Donna said, there's money talking in St. Louis all of the time, and the longer that we wait and the less proactive we are, the more we are doing a disservice to the students of our schools.
So to that point, it is my understanding, Dr. Adams can correct me if I have the dates wrong, that emerging wisdom will be coming before the board on at the May 12th meeting to, like you said, Tracy, continue this conversation and be able to respond to direct questions regarding their work and the report that they put together. So we will be having that at the May 12th meeting to continue that. What are there other ways or other things that the board wants to consider, or Tracy, since you kind of brought this up about continuing this conversation, what ways would you like to do that?
I know that we were discussing closures and consolidations. I'd like to continue that conversation. We were discussing resource allocation and equity. I think that's part of that conversation as well. And we were doing it with the community. And so I'd like to, even in this time where we can't physically gather, I'd like to make sure that we, along the way, find a way to engage the community in the conversation around those things. But I don't want to spend another year doing a disservice to students by not continuing down the path that we started with the St. Louis City community.
So I kind of wanted to add to what Donna was saying and Joyce as well. When we had over 100,000 students in St. Louis Public Schools back in 1970, the city had a population of 1 million, and we have continued to empty out our neighborhoods. Part of that is due to the state legislature. So there is some need for the state legislators to get involved in this. There is a law in 1971, you guys always hear me talk about it, but it causes people who can't afford their property taxes to lose their homes. That affects about 4 dozen St. Louis Public School students every year. Whether it's almost losing their homes or actually being evicted by sheriff's deputies when the LRA takes possession, or a new owner. And those owners sometimes come from the neighborhood and sometimes they don't. So this is happening mostly north side. There are 5 auctions per year. 1 is south side and 4 are north side. So I think that's a really important thing to consider. I think we do need to have our state legislators at the table. This law was enacted in 1971 to hopefully bring money to the schools for all the people who were delinquent, ostensibly. But right now we're becoming the victims of that policy. We are emptying out our neighborhoods and we can't sustain keeping a school open in an empty neighborhood. So like Donna said, we have these vacant buildings, we have drug dealers because we don't have homes. We don't have a family-friendly environment or welcoming neighborhoods anymore. We have a bunch of vacant buildings. As Dr. Adams always says, the jack-o'-lantern effect. So I really think that we need to look at this from not only the city collaboration side, but on a bigger level with the state.
I'm also thinking too, how we might, we've been having the pandemic updates. We've had 2 now, and we'll continue to have them as we're moving through. But I think there needs to be some thoughtful discussion around what our budget circumstances are. We know that we're looking at having widely varying reports, I guess, of the impact on our tax revenues, but we do know that that is coming. And so there are some budget considerations that we need to have here and thinking in the short term as well as the long term, working with potentially working with the legislature. I'm also wondering if there's an opportunity for us to put together a committee. I don't know if it's a district committee or if it's in collaboration with the city, where we might look at some options for our vacant buildings. If I don't know, you know, I know that the district has done some work around this in the past, but I think there is a real opportunity here. You know, we have this report. We spend a lot of time in all of these workshops, and there's an overwhelming feeling from the community that that the vacant buildings, and I know from this board as well, right? Like there's this an overwhelming feeling about the vacant buildings in the neighborhoods and how that perpetuates just this vicious cycle between the city's lack of economic responsibility or economic development or a full, clearly thought out citywide plan. You know, all of this is intertwined together. So how might we look at putting something together to, you know, right now, as we haven't closed any more buildings yet, we're looking at furthering this conversation as we move through the summer and the fall, and are looking forward to next school year. So how might we start putting something together that can start dealing with those concerns? So when, or if and when we're closing additional buildings this school year, what are we going to do with the buildings? We already have a group in place that's starting to look at that. Other questions or comments regarding this report?
I have a few comments. I will try not to repeat what others have already said. But my takeaway is going to a majority of the community visioning sessions. One is a lot of people called for partnership. So I think as people look around the city, they do see a lot of economic development. They do see a lot of businesses moving in. They do see a lot of, you know, even development of the central corridor. And wondering why St. Louis Public Schools isn't a partner in this, not necessarily development, but, you know, if there is shared space at Cortex, is that an opportunity for students? If there is some new engineering facility that's doing X, Y, and Z, is that an opportunity for students? Want a field trip, but actually be engaged with this business and have those professionals that are there take an interest in the students and schools in SLPS. We get presentations from a lot of the partners that we have in terms of the MOUs that, you know, have these handful of students, but a lot of people were calling for, you know, if these businesses are thriving and also not paying taxes, and I think that goes to the government aspect of it, as Natalie said, but if they're not paying taxes, like what is the onus of responsibility that we are putting on them to make sure that these are future people in their workforce, so the future educated and capable and skilled people that they want to hire. So I heard a lot of call for partnerships and people seeing like the business growth in the city going up, but the school potential being stagnant or going down. The second thing that I heard a lot of was a call for transparency. I know we talked about transparency, but specifically transparency in like, what is the plan? And even if a plan isn't fully developed, people talked about how they heard like, okay, well, if we shut down these schools, we'll have more money for X, Y, and Z, and we'll have more money. And then that leads to a sense of hopelessness, because the people that I talked to also said, well, we've seen school closures before. And if we could run a report on what the more was, that the schools that were promised to get more because others are closed, we can't really quantify that. So I think people wanted less promises and more like, okay, well, if there is this closure, we can, I think, more guarantees. So what are the guarantees that we're putting out there? And I know that's hard to say in the current climate and just understanding public budgets, but can we guarantee that there's going to be a social worker in every school? Can we guarantee that there's going to be a full-time nurse? Can we guarantee that there's going to be 2 on-site mental health staff members that are in the building. So not just, yep, closing will give us more resources or allow us to save money, but how are we strategically putting that to place, and how can we be more transparent about what people see?
I wanted to make a comment. I appreciate everything you said, Adam, about people were asking how we can collaborate with other groups and entities. We started working back in 2007. I got on the board in 2006. And we started talking about community schools, about inviting clinics in, law offices, different type of, businesses and what have you to come into St. Louis Public School to share the space, to share the expenses, those kind of things. But what we found is this is quite political. And this is about clearing out neighborhoods. This is about getting rid of brown people. This is a plan called Team 4. And that is what this is all about. This is why things have not gone the way that we have wanted them to go. We have a lot of people that have wonderful, great ideas and want to do the kind of things that you're talking about. It's wonderful. We have a great resource of wealth here, but Team 4 is real. This is about getting rid of folks so other people can come in and buy the property up really cheap, like Natalie said. That was not by happenstance that law came into effect, Natalie. That was on purpose. And it's been going on for decades. I've been here ever since I lived down in Port Igo. I just watch as they go along. You can see large squashes of land in North St. Louis that are empty. No one lives there on purpose. And I talk to people, I used to watch elderly people, what have you, lose their land on purpose. No one was there to help. They might have been a teacher, what have you. I've seen people crying. They only were short, Natalie. You were telling me even just a few dollars to save their property. They couldn't even do it. This is on purpose. Now the city needs to be held accountable. So the school, just like this board here, we want to work with the people. We're here. So it's up to the people who are talking to push the people downtown, the politicians, to do the right thing. Team 4 was real. You can watch Mr. French's, he did an expose on Team 4, and it's a real plan. And it's something that happened to St. Louis Public Schools, and it's a terrible thing that happened. So I'm really hoping that this board will make a difference. We got some wonderful people on this board, even though, we all have our differences, but we have our likes as well. We've trying to work together, okay? And I think we can make a wonderful difference in this city. But I think I'm just worried because like I said, I'm past 60. And when I was 17, I watched Northwest High School go down, 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 down. And all the vacant lots around the school, all the vacant lots in my neighborhood on purpose, and all the people crying, all the people around in my neighborhood walking around looking like zombies every day, drug addicted with no set skills. Hearing people on Bi-State bus say, oh, I just got out of jail, and the neighborhood still looks the same. It never changed. Wow, wonder what happened to all the tax dollars. It went downtown. So it's time for us to really advocate and start talking to those people who make the laws. And I don't think Jefferson City is going to really make a difference because it's so racist in Jefferson City. And they really don't like St. Louis. They really don't like brown St. Louis. So I'm hoping that we can make a difference with other people. Thank you.
Donna, I really appreciate everything you said. And there is a lot of, there are a lot of opportunities in the report, or not opportunities, but a lot of feedback that we're seeing in this report that is asking for us as a board and a board in a district to work in partnership with the mayor and in partnership with the city. So I think there is some, there are, just to go back to my original comments, there's a lot of opportunity for us here to really look for ways that we use our positioning within the district to move some things forward. I think addressing this idea of vacant buildings is important and is a proactive way to look at the community's concerns before we close any additional schools. So I think we need to continue this conversation as we go throughout this process. And like Adam is saying too, just coming up with a plan that is responsive to the needs of our community and works in a way that works for our students. And just how can we how can we do that in a way that puts the students' needs at the center? It does feel, I think, you know, as we're having this conversation, we're talking about it, and I've read through this report, I think like 3 times now. It does feel that we are kind of bearing the brunt of this long-standing situation that the city has been in. And so I would like for us to just really collaborate in a way that is productive.
I just kind of wanted to add to the vacant buildings. The city has discussed or actually enacted some, I guess, some programs to demolish some of the vacant buildings, but we need to be very careful where that funding is coming from. Sometimes we're taking it out of the very neighborhoods who need occupied homes to begin with. So I think that when we're talking about how to deal with vacant buildings, we just need to be mindful of the communities that are most impacted, where the money comes from, how it's spent, and we need to advocate for those communities. And let's be honest, it is mostly in communities of color, particularly north of Del Mar. And just demolishing buildings, it doesn't necessarily mean that a vacant lot makes a neighborhood better just because there's not a vacant building there. We need the population density and opportunities for growth and building.
Yes, and I don't know, maybe what I was saying wasn't coming through. I was not suggesting that we demolish buildings. I'm suggesting a forward-thinking plan for buildings prior to closing schools.
No, I didn't mean that you were. I was just talking about some of the programs that the city has in place that are not necessarily doing us any favors to keep population density in the city.
Yes, agree. Further comments on the Emerging Wisdom Report? If there are specific things that you want to see covered in the presentation by Emerging Wisdom on May 12th, you can send those to me. I'll put all of this again in the board member update following this meeting that I will likely send out tomorrow. But be thinking if there are specifics, I'm sure that they already have some idea planned of what type of presentation they want to do for us. But if there are specifics, we can certainly get those over to them. Any last? Susan, I know you've been going in and out. Do you have any comments on this? Did we lose Susan? This is not her night.
Yeah, there's a storm passing through, Ms. Van Oy said, so
Okay.
yeah, that's the reason why.
Okay. So hopefully she can reconnect soon. The last item on our agenda is the possibility of a new policy to permit the renaming of school buildings that has been driven in part by families at Kennard that are looking to change the name of their building. So tonight, the question before the board is not what name to choose or what names have been floated out there, but do we want to start moving through the process of developing and building renaming policy and or asking Dr. Adams and his team to put together a timeline of what that renaming process might look like? Is there interest from the board to do either or both of those things?
I would say yes.
Other board members?
I'm sorry.
Sure, go ahead, Donna.
I would like the renaming policy, but if we're going to be renaming Kennard after Miss Wheeler, I want to make sure you're paying respect to Metro as well, because I understand that she helped create Metro High School. And many of our school buildings have a wonderful history behind them. And I just want to make sure that we honor that when we go about renaming buildings, that we don't forget the original intent of why we named a building after a particular person. I understand that Kennard was named after a soldier that was in the military races or what have you. But Miss Wheeler, she helped create Metro High School, which was one of the best high schools in the state of Missouri. So I'm hoping that we'll have a plaque or a statue or something in front of Metro if we're going to name Kennard after her. So that, I mean, she deserves that honor. She helped create Metro. Let's do that too.
So again, the question before the board tonight isn't whether, what name we would choose or what buildings to rename, because currently we don't have a policy that allows for this at all. So the first discussion before the board needs to be, do we want to undertake the writing and development of a policy to permit a name change? And kind of in conjunction with that, do we want to ask the district to come up with a timeline and process for the Kennard School specifically? So originally we were looking to have this conversation as a wider part of school consolidations and closures as we look to do that in the spring. With that on hold, I'm asking the board, do you want to do this separately and potentially do it sooner than we would be able to do if we took it all at once?
So let me state first, because I know people will be in my inbox, that I am not opposed to looking into creating a policy around naming or changing the names of schools. But I guess what you just alluded to, Dorothy, my ask would be, what would be the lift on us and on district personnel, just knowing that we are in a time where we still have kids who don't have the technology to do the homework and work that they were supposed to be doing for the last month and a half, and knowing that district staff is on a skeleton crew and they're trying to do as much as they can working around this too. So my ask is just, what do you think, if you could project what the capacity would be for the district, and for the district around it?
Are you asking me or Dr. Adams or both?
Both, because I do know that there would be time that we have to set aside in the agenda, and Mr. St. Omer probably has to look over the legal aspects of it, and then we'd have to go through revisions and all that. So I guess I'm just asking everybody.
So Dr. Adams, what can you weigh in on your side of things? Because I think that would come first before the boards. So regardless of the impact on the board, what would the impact be to the district to take this up right now?
I think we have done some research in this area around a policy. We started looking at this obviously when this came up about 6 or 7 months ago. So I would have to go back and look at information. Mr. Clark, who was our internal auditor, did that work, and I would have to go back and look at his documents. He's no longer with us at this point in time, but I would have to go back and do some research around the other piece. I think that might be a little bit more timely, time consuming, quite frankly, is we've not done any research around the current name of Kennard. Obviously the parents brought a great deal of information to us, but we have not verified anything as it relates to how it was named. We would have to go back in our archives, similar to what Ms. Donna Jones said. We have a lot of archives that we would have to go back and look at and see if there was any kind of, the school name is Kennard in light of the family giving so much money, and if there are any kind of legal challenges around those kinds of things. So I think it would take us a little while. I don't know that we could meet the beginning of the school year timeline. Could it happen during the school year? I think the answer is yes. Could it happen by August or September? I'm not going to make that commitment right now, but I do think it will take us a little while. And to Mr. Lang's point, I do have a skeleton crew of people who are working on other things right now, and I'm not saying this is not important. But I think we could get it done August kind of timeframe. Mr. St. Omer can weigh in around the policy piece because he represents a number of districts throughout the state, and he may have some more intel around the policy that I might have. My big issue is going to quite frankly be research around what the current name is right now, and then if a policy is developed, how you weigh person to, and I know parents came up with Ms. Wheeler and their process. That may not necessarily be our process for looking to name it. So I think bottom line is I think we have the capacity to do it. I'm just concerned about the timing of trying to get it done by August, if there's a fixed time done by August. And I'll defer to Mr. St. Omer on the other piece.
I'll just add that it is obviously a policy to rename buildings is something that if the board is interested in doing, we can look into. Renaming buildings usually requires developing a criteria, a process for submissions and so forth, but it is certainly something that if it's the board's desire to do, it's something we can do, we can look into. It is something my general advice would be that it's a policy that where the lane for re-narrowing is narrow, and that the board gives some consideration as if we go down this path to criteria for how they would select new names, criteria for how buildings would be identified for renaming, and then building on Dr. Adams' point, sometimes there are reasons why a building was named, given a certain name that may sometimes involve some type of endowment to the district or other gift to the district.
So is this an item that the board wants to take up now?
Dorothy, I read through all of the documentation that the parents provided. And so in reading it, I would like to get some additional information and possibly ask some more questions, because as I look at it, Mary Meacham was the name that got the most numbers. And so how did they get to Betty Wheeler if the survey they did gave that information? And so I have a lot of additional questions, and I would like to see some sample around naming before we invest any, long-term time into it. Because as I read it, it's kind of confusing.
Sure. So your questions are noted here. I just, again, we aren't looking at choosing a name. That is not the matter before this is, we have no policy that really even allows us to enter into this conversation or discussion. We cannot direct Dr. Adams to develop a process without a policy that allows us to do this. So we have two things that I'm asking, but they need to come. There's number one and there's a number two. So the number one would be, do we want to write and develop a new policy to rename school buildings that could be used for Kennard? So I would say, based on past practice as far as our timelines go, I would not expect we could approve a policy prior to June. So once there would be a policy that is approved, we could then have the Dr. Adams and his team come up with the timeline process for gathering community input on that name. So one, we need a policy to start this. Once we have that policy, and like Mr. St. Omer is referencing, we would need criteria and both for renaming, gathering input and all of that. Once we have that, then we can start the discussion of what the name be. So does this board want to enter into the discussion or to ask Mr. St. Omer and our legal team to start crafting a for us? So that's the number.
I have a clarifying question. I believe it was fall of 2017. So there's Gateway STEM, which was previously Gateway Institute of Technology, which was previously O'Fallon Tech. And the alumni of O'Fallon Tech, their association tried to rename the football field, and they were told by the special administrative board at that time that there was a policy that prevented certain renamings. They were going to rename it after a living individual, and they're told that there was a board policy on that. So I'm just wanting to clarify, do we actually have a policy, or have we made sure for sure that there is not a policy in existence that we just need to update?
So it is my understanding, Mr. St. Omer, please correct me, the policy that we currently have is for the naming of new buildings, and that a new building or maybe other construction cannot be named after a living person. We do not have anything that allows for renaming of facilities.
That is correct. The current policy is a policy for naming structures not previously named, but not for renaming an existing building.
Okay, so perhaps that was misunderstood by the group of alumni or miscommunicated by the SAB. Is the existing policy something that we could work with to expand, or would we need a totally new policy to cover that particular category of buildings and renamings?
So I was not with the district in 2007, so I cannot speak to what was communicated back in 2000.
Oh, I'm sorry, it was 2017. I'm sorry if I misspoke or if it cut out.
Oh, I don't recall, to be direct with you, I don't recall any discussions about O'Fallon Tech or anything that I was party to, so I can't speak to that as well.
Yeah, and I want to clarify one thing. I think, and Ms. Salem, correct if I'm wrong, I think what the policy calls for, if I remember correctly, is that you still have to retain the name of the facility.
That is
So-
correct.
But even if Kennard's name was changed, it would still be part of the facility. And so that's what I was, I think that's part of the challenge that the community is having, because even if you change it, let's say it would still be Betty Wheeler at Kennard. And I'm just using that name. And so the whole idea is that you take Kennard off that name and it would still be part of the name. So, and I think the policy that would have to be put in place will allow you not to keep that original facility name on it. So,
That is correct. The Pomoja school was renamed, the SAB added the name Bertha Gilkey, but it retained the original name. And so the Bertha Gilkey was added, but it was not, the original name of the school was not changed. So it is the Bertha Gilkey School. I'm not going to do the exact quote or correctly, but it is Bertha Gilkey at Pomoja is, I believe, the name of the school.
that is correct.
So is this creation of a new policy something the board wants right now?
I would like to see us start to adopt a new policy for renaming buildings.
So let's, Mr. St. Omer, do we need a vote here?
You don't necessarily need a vote tonight if the instruction is just for the administration to begin to explore the process.
Okay, so let's do it this way. Is there any opposition to directing legal to start engaging in the development of a new policy?
I have a question. If we didn't do it now, if we didn't start the process now, then what would it just be something that we considered later?
So that would be the question for the board. Do you have a recommendation, Adam? When would you, I'm wondering if you have an idea of when you would like to see us take this up.
I don't have a recommendation. I just feel like I think we have a lot to focus on. I'll just put it that way.
Yeah, to be clear, I'm not suggesting that we immediately change the name of buildings, but I think that it's an important topic. And if we can draft a policy, it would be a beneficial start for when we're ready to actually make the movement.
I'm happy to begin looking into that process if the board, if it is the board's desire.
So the reason why this is on the agenda tonight is because I've heard from board members over the past, I don't remember when we first started discussing, like 18 months, I think, right? That we've been hearing this. I have heard at various times over those 8 months that this is something the board wants to take up. Like I expressed at the meeting, I am looking to kind of start working back in some of the things that we had on our list of items prior to the pandemic into these upcoming work sessions and meetings. So this is one of those. What I'm asking for now is what is the direction the board would like to take? Okay, Mr. St. Omer, will you start researching policies as it pertains to renaming the school buildings?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. Any other further discussion on this matter? Dr. Adams, do you have anything else?
Simply I provide the board with a pandemic update. I won't get into the details. Some of it's still being negotiated, especially as it relates to facilities. So I just want the board to have that document. Mrs. Val asked about graduations and prom, and I think this document kind of gives you an update of what we're thinking about or what we're looking to do in space. So I just want to make sure that you had a copy of it. Don't need to discuss it at any point in time. It has I put the big rocks, meaning the number of meals we've made, we've fed since the last time we talked about shifting to the 7-day meals, the number of technology pieces that we put out, and all of those kinds of things. So I just kind of wanted to give you an update every 2 weeks, every time we meet, just where we are from a data perspective on all of those different things.
Any questions for Dr. Adams as it pertains to that update we received? Is there a motion to adjourn?
I move that we adjourn.
Second, Ms.
I
Lewis?
think Joyce is trying to say something.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
Yes, I have a question on the pandemic report under
Yes, ma'am.
assessment and accountability, and let me just give you an example. Let's go down to approximately how many hotspots have we already distributed? The top number is 1850 have been packaged for distribution. The next line says 2,999 have been packaged for distribution. And so it's kind of confusing. What is that really saying?
Let me get-
It's in the pandemic report. It's on the back of the cover page. And
okay,
I
so-
just went down to the fourth line under assessment and accountability. It says 1850 have the question, how many
Oh, I'm
hotspots have we already distributed?
So the first number is a number I gave you at the last meeting, and the green number is an updated number. So at the last meeting, which was the 14th, I gave you 1850 have been packaged for distribution. As of Friday, Monday, 299 have been packaged for distribution. So that's an update from the previous meeting. The bottom number is an update from the previous meeting. The top number is what it was on April the 28th. And I'm sorry, not April 10th, April of whenever the last meeting was, April the 14th. And the new number is as of Monday, what that data is.
So package for distribution means they've been given out.
Package for
Is
distribution,
that what package for distribution means?
it means that they were ready to be picked up. We are still in the process of giving out. And about 85% that we package for distribution, parents don't come and pick up. And so that's why it says package for distribution. You follow where I'm going?
Okay, is it, I do now with your explanation. Is it
Yes, ma'am.
possible to say that we've given out 3,000 hotspots rather than, that's misleading
Well,
to me.
The only reason is it continues to change, and so we have not stopped yet. And so
Okay,
that's the only reason I put that there, because schools were distributing today. They were distributing Friday. They were distributing 2 days ago. I had 27 families that we dropped stuff off to today. So it's a moving number. So I would rather say that we are packaged for distribution, because families have to receive it and say we still want it. Some families are saying, thank you, I'd rather not have it at this point in time.
okay, so let me say that again. Is there any way to know how many we have given to people?
If you're asking me for a number of how many actually are in people's homes that they're using right now, I can give you another number that it's saying package for distribution. Yes, ma'am. I can give you a hard number. I was being consistent with what we had previously, because at that point in time, we were packaging it. I can come back by the next meeting and tell you exactly how many people have in their hands.
Okay, that have received the technology.
Yes,
and they
ma'am.
have it in their hands and then.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, sir, please. Thank
No
you.
problem. Yes, ma'am.
Anything else?
And Dr. Adams, if we have additional questions about the pandemic update, we can just email you directly.
Oh, yes, yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay, so I believe there was a motion to adjourn on the table. Ms. Lewis?
Ms. D. Jones,
Yes.
Ms. S. Jones, Mr. Lane,
Yes.
Ms. Miller,
Yes.
Dr. Roberts,
Yes, thanks, Dr. Adams, for the information.
Oh, no problem. Thank you.
Mrs. Val,
Yes.
Mrs. Rhodey Collins.
Yes.
We are adjourned.
Good night, everybody.
Good night. Thank you, board.
Right.
Good night.